Guten Tag und Hallo. Ich bin Billy Badger und das ist Bausteine 1. Im Moment bin ich zu Hause, aber manchmal möchte man auch mal irgendwo anders sein oder irgendwo anders hingehen. Heute bin ich für Sie da. Herzlich willkommen. Well, for the past few weeks, we have been working our way along a sentence, slowly adding in new elements, neue Bausteine, that allow us to express ourselves with more precision. We've introduced subjects and verbs that allow us to talk about what we are doing. We've added in objects and squeezed in time phrases. We've learned how to join sentences with conjunctions and connectors, and now we arrive at one of the final elements that we can use in our sentences. This week we're looking at place phrases, those phrases that will allow us to talk about where we are or where we're going. So let's get started. Also fangen wir an. As usual, I'm going to divide this section up into a couple of different sections. And since we're talking this week about the idea of where, we'll split up our discussion according to one of the following questions. Where are you going? Or where are you? Now, at this stage, it will be useful to think about the W question words we use in German. In English, we are just using the word where, although of course we could have rephrased the first question as where are you going to rather than where are you going. And similarly, you'll remember that there are three interconnected wo words in German. Wo allows us to talk about where we or something is. In other words, its location. WOHIN, on the other hand, considers questions of destination or where we are going to. Woher, which we won't be looking at today, asks questions about origins. Where have you come from? But let's start with wohin, as this is going to be perhaps the most useful of all of these W question words. This is going to allow us to talk about places we go to. Now, with that said, first a word of warning. In English, we use one preposition for talking about places we are going to, and this is, of course, the word to, fairly unsurprisingly. And if you look the word up in the dictionary, the results are unfortunately quite confusing and not so helpful, as the precision of German requires us to use a number of different prepositions. So first of all, I want to think about a word which we've used a few times, nach. When talking about cities or countries, continents, or even in fact our own homes, this is the preposition we'll use. Let's take a couple of simple examples. Im Sommer fahren wir oft nach Sydney. Nächstes Jahr fliegen wir wieder nach Österreich. Ich gehe jetzt nach Hause. Our next preposition is one that didn't come up in the list in the dictionary, interestingly enough. This is one, however, that we use a lot, particularly for going to places where you're actually going into a building or a place where you will probably spend a fair bit of time, and where it's all really about the experience in that place. And here we need to know, as pretty much always is the case, the gender of the place we're going to, since we need to use the right article. For some reason, a lot of places we commonly go into are either neuter or feminine. Let's take a couple of examples. Ich gehe in die Kneipe. Ich gehe in die Stadt. Ich gehe in die Bibliothek. Ich gehe in die Vorlesung. As you can see and hear from the examples, all of these places are feminine. And they're all places where your ultimate destination is in a location where you'll probably spend a good bit of time. Many other examples are neuter. Ich gehe in das Kino. And here mostly we contract in das to ins. So you'll say, ich gehe ins Kino, ich gehe ins Restaurant, ich gehe ins Café, ich gehe ins Museum, and so on. Now, as I said, a lot of the places we go to are neuter or feminine, but if the place you were going to happened to be masculine, then you'd use in den, since the place phrase will be an object of sorts. And our masculine object article is den rather than der, which we know by now. So for example, ich gehe in den Park. Okay, but not all of our destinations are places where we intend spending a whole lot of time and we're maybe not interested in that experience that I've been talking about. Maybe we just want to go there, be at a place perhaps, rather than in it. And this is where we have to use a new preposition, zu. Again, the gender of the place will be important. You can get away with just using the preposition by itself if you use the name of a place, a shop, or perhaps a friend that you were going to. So this would be perhaps, ich gehe zu Meier, ich gehe zu McDonald's, ich gehe zu Simon und Tina. But if we'd normally use an article, and we often do, then we need to include this as part of the preposition. Now, unfortunately, zu is a preposition that we use with a new case, the dative, and we don't get to talk about that really until week 12. So for now, we'll just briefly introduce the two forms we're going to use. So if the place you're going to be at is not feminine, you'll use zum, which means to the. So, ich gehe zum Supermarkt, ich gehe zum Strand. But if the place you're going to be at is feminine, then you'll use zur, which also means to the, but indicates that the destination is feminine. So you could say, ich gehe zur Post, ich gehe zur Uni. So for most of the destinations that we'll commonly talk about in German, we'll be using one of these two prepositions to help us to describe that, in or zu. But before we move on, let's maybe see what happens if we use different prepositions than the ones that I've recommended using. Let's go, for example, to the pub. Now, I've suggested that we use in. Ich gehe in die Kneipe. But what if we just go absolutely crazy here and use zu instead? Well, I'm glad you asked. Kneipe is feminine, so this would be ich gehe zur Kneipe. Now that's okay, but what this sort of implies is that you're going to the pub and then will be at the pub, but not necessarily in the pub, maybe just sort of hanging around outside. Let's try a different example. I've suggested using zu for going to the supermarket. So this would be, ich gehe zum Supermarkt. But let's, again, live on the edge. Let's try using in instead. A supermarket is masculine. So this would be, ich gehe in den Supermarkt. Now what this conveys is clearly the action of going into the supermarket, that moment of you going through the door. So while you can actually use either zu or in, the meaning will be slightly different each time, and you kind of need to think about what it is that you're trying to convey. As well as in and zu, we also use other prepositions to get across the idea of to in German. And the only one I want to look at here, for the moment anyway, is the word auf. We use this for some relatively random places and events. So for example, am Samstag gehe ich auf ein Konzert. On Saturday, I'm going to a concert. But here actually I could have said, am Samstag gehe ich ins Konzert, which would have meant roughly the same thing, but with ins, we're conveying more the idea of a formal concert that you're going to in a concert hall, whereas auf would allow us also to get across the idea perhaps of a less formal concert, maybe even a festival or a rock concert or something. So we can also use auf for going to parties. Am Freitagabend gehe ich auf eine Party. So I suggest a few other examples in your textbook. It'll be worth having a look down through those. Now, all of these examples have described places that we go to, so destinations, and these are not locations. So we need to be careful to make that distinction between destinations and locations. And we need to be a lot more careful when we're talking about locations, because location is generally described using a new case, one that we don't want to think about just at the moment. So it's not the nominative or the accusative, but rather the dative. And as I say, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. We'll be looking at the dative in week 12. But for the most part, you can fairly easily change your sentence into where you're going rather than where you are. So perhaps for the moment, we don't even really need locations too much. But here are a couple of location phrases that might be useful in the meantime, and we can use as a bit of a pattern to work with other locations that we spend time at. In order, we'll be looking at bei, am, and auf. Now, to talk about being at someone's place, we'll use bei. And here I would recommend, for now at least, only using their name, and then we won't have to use any of those fancy dative articles. For example, die Party ist am Samstagabend bei Karin. The party is at Karen's place on Saturday night. Notice we don't need to say place or house or anything like that. In answer to the question, wo bist du? Where are you? You could answer, ich bin bei Lina. I'm at Lena's place. The preposition am that we learned when talking about time can also be useful when talking about being at a river, a lake or a beach, or essentially the end or the edge of something. Ich bin am Wochenende gern am Strand. I like being at the beach at the weekend. Or wir gehen am Fluss spazieren. We go for walks at or along the river. The preposition auf is useful in a couple of different situations. Wir wohnen auf dem Land. Wir wohnen nicht in der Stadt, wir wohnen auf dem Land. We live in the country. Wir wohnen auf einem Berg, or wir wohnen auf einem Hügel. We live on a mountain or a hill. As you can see, we also have to use a new article. So it will be best for now to concentrate on sentences that describe where you're going rather than where you are as much as possible, so we don't need to learn too much that's new at one time. Sometimes it's easier to use a simple place adverb to describe where you are. In English we use here and there, and in German you can use the same sort of phrases. Ich wohne seit 2018 hier. I've been living here since 2018. And you could ask a friend, wie lang wohnst du schon dort? How long have you been living there? So it's a fairly deep and involved topic, to be fair. One that's going to take a bit of practice, as always. So let's do exactly that. I'm going to show you some pictures along with the beginning of the sentence, and your job will be to complete the sentence with a nice place phrase. Am Samstag gehen wir gern. Am Wochenende fahren wir. Samstags gehen wir. Am Freitagabend gehen wir gern. Unsere Möbel kaufen wir meistens. Jeden Tag gehe ich zu Fuß. Am Mittwochabend gehen wir. Wir wohnen nicht in der Stadt, sondern Wir essen viel Obst, also gehen wir oft. Well, I hope that went okay. You'll find some possible answers in the description below. And of course, head over now to your textbook, read through Part C, Struktur, and try some of the Übungen. Und so, das war's dann für heute und auch diese Woche. Ich wünsche Ihnen eine schöne Woche und wie immer, wenn Sie Fragen haben, schreiben Sie sie unten in den Kommentaren. Alles Gute, auf Wiedersehen und tschüss.